So for this presentation, we picked the debate, should women work outside of homes? This topic we felt that was talked about throughout the decades. It's going to be presented by Olga Kuchov and
Olga Sagantseva.
Okay, so let's get started. So the era that we picked to talk about this topic was mostly during the Great Depression. The Great Depression was known for the worst economical downturn in American history. It started after a stock market crash that was on October 1929, lasting for over 10 years till 1939. So on this slide we see two photos. The photo on the left was taken by Dorothy Landry. She was an American photographer. She was best known for her photography that was happening during the Great Depression era of the humanity and the consequences that happened to all the people. Women struggled to feed and clothe themselves and their family, as well as the wages, while society discouraged mothers from working to preserve the idea of breadwinning fathers. And then the photo on the right was promoted as women to be strong individuals and productive citizens, because their labor was needed to replace the men who went to the war, which happened at the end of the Great Depression era, around 1939, right before the World War II started. After the war, women were expected to return back to their roles as mothers and wife, regardless of their need or desire to work. So when we talk about the roles, back before the Great Depression started and during the Great Depression, women and men had been socialized to see their roles differently. Men were the breadwinners and women worked at home. However, when the Great Depression started, some men often saw themselves as failures due to loss of their jobs and not making as much money as they would before the economical crash. Women, on the other side, saw themselves as the benefit to the family, and they volunteered to go ahead and then start working to help the men and raise their family. So women started to look for their jobs as nurses, school teachers, cleaning ladies, cooking ladies, so everything that they knew as they would do at homes. So by the time between 1929 and 1939, the job women who worked has increased by 20%. Women in workplace, by statistics, were 1/3 were married, which was increased by 50% from the start of the Great Depression. If women were not working and or could not get a job outside their homes, women were known to be saving resource, such as they would work from home to make stuff they would usually buy before the Great Depression, such as making their own clothing rather than buying from the stores, making more food rather than buying it from the outside. By the 1930s, over 3,000 women were employed in Rockford. Out of those 3,000 women, 743 women worked in the industrial world, while the other companies tried to accommodate women. Workload remained minimal because they believed that men were the breadwinners and women are not allowed to be working outside of their clerk jobs. Also, Workload were not willing to fire men and hired women to replace men. During the Great Depression, 26 states had laws prohibiting the employment of married women. If women were to be married and working, it was said that woman was stealing a job from a man. According to Section 213 of 1932 Federal Economy Act, stated that one person from each family was allowed to be employed by United States government. That being said, this was most likely to aim at diminishing the employment of the married woman, as men were always the first pick for the employment, and they were, as said before, they were seen as breadwinners. In 1932 and 1935, the Atlanta Board of Education proposed that schools disallowed their female teachers from being married. If female teacher or employee was to get married, the school would refuse to hire them, or if they were already employed, they would get fired. 25% of the National Recovery Administrative Codes that were made during the Great Depression were discriminating against the woman, as they would prefer to lower the minimum wage for the woman in the case the woman would quit or go back home, and then the place would be for men. So if we look at the annual pay in 1937, that was almost at the end of the Great Depression. For women, it was 525 versus men would receive 1,027. Men continued made more money than women, even if women made a large percentage of employee in the industrial departments.
Okay. The Great Depression and the establishment of the New Deal agricultural policies, it seems, had affected black people differently than they did white people. Black women in the North, on the average, fared worse than whites. Although, if we look at the unemployment statistics of black women in the South, their rate is lower than the unemployment rate of black men. If we take a closer look and analyze the difference between unemployment rates of black and white women, they're quite shocking. In 10 cities that make up the sample, the unemployment rates of black women ranged from twice to more than 4 times the rates of white women. Racism was a major reason for this. Black women didn't always have the opportunity to get an education, and unemployment rates were higher among the less skilled and less educated. Below is a table that shows the statistics. Hispanic women, however, suffered consequences of the Great Depression at a different level. Unlike blacks, they were viewed as unwanted immigrants that came of their own accord. Mexicans experienced deeper-rooted prejudice based in the perception that Mexicans were less educated, more morally inferior, and had obtained their jobs as strike breakers. Many Hispanic men had no choice but to seek jobs at places like coal mines, where working conditions were unbearable. They were constantly threatened by non-Hispanic miners and strikers. To make matters worse, these men were intentionally assigned to high-risk jobs, which resulted in major accidents and even death. Because of this, Mexican women were forced to abandon their role as a mother and homemaker and work in local hospitals, salons, as secretaries, house cleaners, and cooks.
So, lastly, when women was employed by the employers, women received an hostile treatment from the employers and the man employers who worked next to them. So that resulted in some women that were unhappy being hired outside of the home jobs because they were constantly being treated bad. They were constantly getting the backlash that she's a woman and she's working and taking men's job. So because of the employment rate of the men was equivalent to the employment rate of the women, the employment rate of the women was 25.4% in the late 1930s, and the unemployment rate of the men was 25%. So this to end up this subject, the hostile environment was summarized by Norman Cousins, who was an American political journalist. He said, simply fire the woman who shouldn't be working anyway and hire a man pesto, no employment, no relief roles, no depression. So
Bottom line, before jumping to conclusions and adopting a negative attitude towards women's employment outside the home, one must first consider that women had no choice but to get a job. A mother has to feed her children and provide for herself. Although all women had it hard during the Great Depression, each race experienced the consequences differently. Women through the times had been discredited and judged for going out of norms. Men are considered breadwinners and women belong in the house. After doing much research, we concluded that there was a clear correlation between race, gender, and unemployment.